thank you for making time to join us for Innovating and Evolving in an Era of Change. I know some of you joining this session are guests of mine, but others I've not met before. So I want to start with our introductions a little bit about me, because I'll be your moderator, but the real content this session comes from our guest panelists. My name is Nate Mute. I'm the Vice President for Graduate and Online Solutions here at RNL, and I've served in a range of roles in higher education and higher education associations for over 25 years. I've led institutional rebranding, resetting undergraduate pricing and discount rates. I've led a series of organizational and restructuring efforts to align enrollment with institutional goals. So I have a deep personal appreciation for this topic and enough experience to know that we all need as many guides and models for innovation as we can find. And so over the course of the last year, I've had the pleasure of meeting both Dr. Campbell and David Kirshner in different settings and hearing them talk about some of their own experience. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest panelists, who each provide unique leadership into academic disciplines within higher education. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their current role and a brief overview of some prior roles. And so Patricia, let's start with you. I'll let you go first.
Wonderful, thanks. Really appreciate it, Nate. Yeah, so currently I am the Dean of Bennard College at the University of the Pacific, and Bennard College houses our education, leadership, counseling, school psychology, professional continuing education, and all things international at University of the Pacific. And our programs range our 3 campuses from Sacramento to Stockton to San Francisco. Prior to this, I was at American Public University, where I was the Associate Provost for Innovation, where I led our initiatives on competency-based education, prior learning assessment, developing new doctoral degrees, as well as certificates. And so that's sort of a little bit about my background.
That's great, thank you. And we'll learn a lot more in the coming questions. That's great. David, can you tell us a little about your current role and some prior roles as well?
Sure, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I am David Kirshner, and I'm currently the Associate Dean overseeing admissions, financial aid, and innovation of the JD programs at University of Southern California's Gould School of Law. I think my background in innovation runs fairly deep. I consider myself a Zennial, so late Gen X, early millennial, and from my earliest roles as Associate Director of Admissions at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, I've always been looking for ways not to innovate for innovation's sake, but to innovate in ways to better reach out and market to our prospective law student population. So at Gould, started out as Director of Admissions, then became Associate Dean of Admissions, and have added financial aid and most recently innovation to my umbrella here. I really got deep into the world of innovation in a term on the Law School Admission Council, or LSAC's, Board of Trustees, where I served as the inaugural chair of their Emerging Markets and Innovation Committee, and I served in that role for 3.5 years.
Well, thanks to both of you for those just quick oversights, insights into your background. But as for those of you attending, you can really tell there's reasons why we've reached out to both of them. They both represent different institutions and different niches within higher education, but they also have experience that we just think is a great example of how to think about this if you're new to a role, or if you've been tasked in a way that you are being pressed to think about innovation and you want to hear more conversation on this. So thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to just start by giving you some context. There will be a couple of slides now that I'm going to share that are going to talk a bit more about kind of what's happening in the marketplace. And in particular, I want to just begin by saying we often know there are pressures in the marketplace around demographics. In specific, we use this data in some of our reports where we talk about at the undergraduate level, enrollment has been in a somewhat steady decline since about 2019, and yet last year, in a very positive way, there was a bit of a rebound, particularly at the community college level nationwide. There were enrollment growth and private universities where you saw, in essence, a 1% growth. But what we've understood for some time is that undergraduate enrollment, based on the 2008 kind of birth rate decline, we knew there was an inevitability that enrollment was going to be sliding. And looming kind of behind the scenes in all of this, often people refer to this as the enrollment cliff, that in around 2024, 2025, 2026 and on, there is a known decline in traditional college-going age students. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't still demand and there isn't still areas where growth is found. And interestingly enough, much of that has been found at the graduate level, although not a complete replacement for the number of students at the undergraduate. It has been over about a 5-year period, a place where growth has been happening. There have been some recent reports, depending on how people have interpreted the National Student Clearinghouse and IPEDS data recently. You know, there is a down from graduate growth, particularly in 2020 and 2021, but there has been a leveling out of what we describe as kind of a pre-pandemic level of growth, sub 1%, but a pretty steady decline prior to 2019, and now in 2023 we've seen that again. So I give that as context, but at a deeper level, there is a series of line graphs. I just want to share that for those of you who follow the work of Scott Jeffy here at RNL, who's our thought leader around graduate and online learning, he has helped us unpack some of the modality trends. So whether you're in-person learning, which would be at the undergraduate, this larger, higher blue line that has been seeing similar to just general enrollment. Oh, sorry, one too many. General enrollment declines at the undergraduate. There has been a raising or rising line that's coming to meet it, which is this undercurrent of online learning as a modality choice for undergraduates. Now, if there had been no pandemic, and if those lines would have been following kind of their natural course for a longer period, really out past 2031, we would have likely seen an intersection of desired modalities around online and in person. But as we all experienced, for the complexity, the goods and the bads of the online learning forced the issue in 2020. And since that time, we've now seen that those modality trends have really accelerated, particularly around online and hybrid. And now we're seeing kind of a 2020-28 intersection of what would have been student preferences around in-person versus hybrid or online. I bring that up because it's even more pronounced at the graduate level. At the graduate level, you'll see these intersections happening a bit more pronounced at an earlier time frame. When we looked out at graduate trends on modality and you looked forward, you thought it would have probably stood to reason that 2025 would have been the period of time where intersection of desired modality would have been online or hybrid versus in person. But what we found is that's actually come to take place even as we're speaking this year. This academic year is starting to prove that the mix or the student choice is already leaning towards or matching online with in person. Why spend time on this? I think in light of the headlines around budgets, in light of the challenges around meeting undergraduate enrollment, innovation and kind of the need for evolving in an era of change, this is an example of era of change. We have seen this happen in some very interesting ways because the research that we provide on an annual basis, you'll see reports from us that cover student expectations in an online modality or student expectations from a graduate student level of learning. And you'll see how students and administrators have responded to that. And what we've found from a myriad of different inputs on this is that we've seen student expectations from historic levels really change because so many of the buying and consumer experiences that we have shaped that. From Netflix to Amazon, Starbucks, from the Grubhubs and the DoorDashes to just simply our social media platforms influencing us. What once would have been acceptable to walk into a coffee shop and wait for a period of time and maybe get a coffee that's customized to you, we now do with a mobile app and walk in and expect to be waiting at a mobile counter at a Starbucks probably any time of the day or night. And similarly, for those of us who are a little bit, I love David's description of zillennial. Did I get that right, David? I think it's zillennial.
Yep, Zennial. Yep, you
Yeah,
got it.
Zennial. Yeah, I love the description because for some of us, we've bordered that line between must-see TV on a Thursday. We knew that we had to schedule our week around watching a favorite show at a certain day of the week. That has all been turned its head in an on-demand entertainment industry that now we expect as a consumer to watch and binge watch an entire series if we wanted to on whatever time or day we had available to us. That can't be overlooked, that it's shaping how students expect to engage their learning. And we have seen it played out in some themes like what sounds like a pejorative, but it really is just a description that there's a me-centric. It's students expect things to work with them, that meet their expectations, not necessarily the duration of the program or the start date that we've historically always launched our programs and expect them just to find a way into it. The rise in consumer mentalities. There is a dramatic need for speed that we see in all of our survey work with students. And in the midst of all this, they want meaningful connections. They see the opportunity to connect through these platforms, whether it's in person or online, whether it's at the undergraduate or graduate level. They do want something from it that we might have been able to get away with as higher education. And now we realize we need to deliver it in new ways. So I bring all this up because this is the context. This is the air that we breathe now in higher ed. And when we reached out to Patricia and to David, we asked them if they could join us for a conversation about their own experiences. We've been able to see behind the scenes some really interesting insights they've shared with us as we've worked with them. And now we want to invite them to join us as panelists today to answer some questions. And I'm going to just camp on this slide for a second, where I'm going to start with Patricia. And I'm going to I'm asking her to tell us ways that you have innovated in your various roles, specifically digging down into some of the things like organizational challenges. How do you manage the organizational challenges that you've encountered? How do you handle budget and staffing constraints? And how do you determine if innovation was successful? So Patricia, I'm going to just start with you, and why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your own experiences, and then David, I'll turn to you, and then we may have some time to have kind of a little back and forth on this.
Sure. Thanks, Nate. Let me flip this and start with the bottom, and maybe reiterate something that David was saying earlier. Innovation is kind of this key word that we hear all over higher ed these days. And I don't think about innovation as something that we do just for the sake of saying we've done innovation. To me, there ought to be a reason that you're doing innovation. What's your problem that you're trying to solve? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Typically in higher ed, we're looking at enrollment, right? That becomes our key performance indicator. Are we really just looking to increase enrollment in a particular program? But there are other things, particularly in our programs, that we look at, which is community engagement and how the programs that we're offering, working with the community and getting the feedback in from the community. And so we place the community very central in terms of some of the decision making that we do. But to sort of circle around and come back to the kind of first question is, I think for me, innovation, the biggest hurdles to making change that you need to make, or to innovate, to deliver a better, I know we don't like the word product in higher ed, but to deliver a better program, is to really think about what are the hurdles and the obstacles that might prevent you. So whenever I'm thinking about something new, I always think about what might be those challenges that are behind the scenes. And these are things that, as a traditional academic, and I can certainly say as somebody who's a faculty, I just never really thought that much about. Would a system support my idea? If we want to have an interdisciplinary system, a program, how is that going to work with all the back-end systems? And that's just not something that we're kind of trained to think about. But I think if you're going to be successful at implementing new programs, you really have to understand what your systems are capable of. And then you also have to kind of come in with this approach of not accepting the answer of, well, it's the way we've always done things. Instead, the approach needs to be, but how can we do that better? So if the system is the problem, let's talk about what we can do to fix the system or to make a change so that we can do what we need to do. And I ran into this, for example, when we were coming up with our competency-based education at my prior institution. There were a lot of financial aid considerations and constraints. And so if I tell you I met one time with our financial aid team to try and figure this out and work it out, I met with them 50 times. And so I think that's the other thing to think about when you're thinking about new programs, is you have to have a level of patience. You have to have a willingness to have a conversation, maybe multiple times, even with the same folks who need to be convinced of, because whatever you're doing is going to create a workload on somebody else. And so you've got to be really cognizant of, how can I help you manage that workload, so that I'm not just saying, hey, here's this idea, you all go figure this out and come back to me with an answer. I think you really want to get in there and spend time and understand what the hurdles are, so that you can be helpful in the solution and not just kind of creating work for others. Because that, regardless, when you come up with something new, there may be a new workload then on the registrar's office, or depending upon what the program is. And so you really have to be mindful of that. You then have to make sure that you're talking with all the various stakeholders to say, I know this might not be your priority. This is my priority. How can we work together to kind of, maybe you help me with my priority this time, and I'll jump in to help you. It's a little political horse trading to some extent, to be sure. And so I think you just have to be super mindful of what's going on behind the scenes and be willing to engage there, be problem solving, and to not let can't do that be the answer to stop you from moving forward.
That's great. I appreciate the candor on being behind the scenes and understanding what it means to the others that are going to be impacted by that. That's a really wonderful takeaway. David, I'm going to turn to you, and let's just hear about a little bit how you've tackled some of these same questions and how you've addressed them from your role.
Yeah, certainly. So I think one of the difficult challenges is deciding when to innovate. And I think in that scenario, data is our friend. And to steal from our friends in the business school world, I think a data-driven SWOT analysis can be really helpful when trying to figure out, when is innovation called for, and to overcome potential institutional resistance to it, right? So it's knowing what are our strengths and our weaknesses, and what opportunities and threats are posed. And to give a quick example there, so the traditional JD or Juris Doctor degree, it's fairly conservative as far as legal education goes. It's an in-person degree, and I'm not expecting that that's going to change anytime soon, with a few minor exceptions. So while the modality of how the degree is offered may not be changing, we can certainly change in the enrollment sphere how we communicate with our prospective student markets. And this goes back to the slide that you just had up there recently, Nate. We can meet students in their real-time, on-demand desire for information. There are certainly ways to do that. We've been able to do that adopting Salesforce as our CRM system. Oftentimes a prospective student doesn't want to wait for an email response, right? They expect that response to come immediately. So we've also put an artificial intelligence generated chatbot on our website. So for some very basic questions, our prospective student audience can get answers in real time through that chatbot. So that's finding solutions driven by the problems. That's finding opportunities driven by the threats that we face. I'll point to one other example. Your prior slide had talked about this me-centric world that this generation of prospective students is living in. So our admitted student conversion piece that we send out, it's themed welcome home, right? So our goal is to get an admitted student to picture themselves here as their home. So they open up the brochure, and in the front cover is a series of thumbnails like you'd find on Instagram, right? A series of thumbnail photographs illustrating some of the strengths of our community. So again, where I saw that challenge was that the JD degree itself is not going to change from an in-person program anytime soon. But knowing that, again, kind of on the enrollment side, we can change how we reach out, how we market, and how we engage with our prospective student audience. So that's been a real focus for innovation.
Well, I appreciate both of you kind of coming at it from, from similar, accomplishing similar tasks, but doing it in some interestingly unique ways. I think both of you have touched on this organizational aspect and the data collection and the data. When we kind of turned the corner a little bit to a question about, this is something that I posed to both Patricia and David, and I think this is one that often we're not the captains of when innovation is being demanded of the institution. We often are kind of handed mandates and told, go forward. And so I think the way we framed it is, when your university leaders come to you, whether it's a dean or a president or a provost, whatever it might be, come to you to find enrollment growth, what type of innovation have you pursued to meet that challenge? Patricia, I'm going to start with you again, and I feel free as we kind of conclude this, David and Patricia, we might have a little bit of a back and forth on, kind of where this overlaps. Patricia, start though with you. Tell us a little about how you kind of had this kind of experience yourself.
So we had Bennett College at University of the Pacific is actually the result of a merger between two very different colleges, and I became its first dean. And so right away I was handed by the administration, okay, how are you going to demonstrate success? What are you looking at in the next couple of years to demonstrate that you can grow enrollments, innovate, come up with new programs, et cetera? And so we sat down with the numbers and we looked at all of our enrollments. We looked at the cost of each program for the number of students that we had, how much staff cost, how much faculty cost. We ran all of the numbers. And one of the things we realized is that one of our cherished programs was really just costing us too much money. And we had very, very low enrollments with dwindling enrollments every year. And so it was a very tough decision. And anyone who's ever had to do this knows how tough it can be, but to close a program. So we had to close our Bachelor of Teacher Education program, and that was a beloved program, particularly in the Stockton, San Joaquin area. And we had a lot of stakeholders who were very invested in us keeping the program, regardless of enrollment. They didn't want to know the numbers. They didn't want to hear the numbers. That was very uncomfortable. And so I had the pleasure of kind of walking that around and saying, okay, here are the numbers. Here's what it looks like. I think I have a plan that we could actually get the numbers where we want, but not with this program. And so it was a lot of conversation. Again, I guess patience ought to be something you think about when you think about innovation, because you have to talk to a lot of people, and sometimes a lot. Anyway, so the faculty were with me. They voted to close the program. And so, so that allowed us to put our resources into a new program that we started, which was a 12-month master's with credential. And that sounds great. And I would say this about innovation. Innovation is about creating something new, evaluating it, iterating, and continuing on. So it's not sort of, I did this thing and now we're done, I'm just going to sit back and isn't this great? But I will say we brought in 124 new teacher candidates this year into that program. So that was successful, but it still left us this gap of what do we do with this undergrad piece? So we've created a degree completion program, which will be a pathway into the graduate 12-month program that will allow students to get their bachelor's, master's with credential in less than 2.5 years fully online. So it was, here's this idea, how do we take this, how do we iterate, how do we continue moving forward? So sometimes it's about making difficult decisions, but I think you have to be poised and set to say, okay, take this risk with me because I feel like we're gonna come out the end okay.
Yeah, that's a great description of something kind of being dropped in your lap and finding a way to meet the challenge that's still missional. Thank you. That's one of the ones that I knew we wanted to hear. David, let's turn to you. Tell us a little about how, when you've had these moments of being turned to, how have you tackled innovation in some of the work that you've done?
Certainly, and I think, what's really important here is going into innovation with a strong understanding of what your institution's mission and goals are, and that any type of innovation should be aligned. with the mission and goals of your institution. So, I find myself in a position that I think many chief admission officers would like to be in that on the JD side of things, for a variety of reasons. I have not been pushed for enrollment growth, right? But that said, the law school as a whole certainly does need enrollment growth for revenue and other purposes, right? So looking at the JD program for a minute here. So even though the overall enrollment goals have not increased, what I have done successfully is look at ways to segment that pool, right? Is an enrollment officer, you're always looking at yields. And the more predictable your yields can be, the easier it is to build a class. So, again, on the JD side, the things we do enrollment-wise are governed by our accreditors, the American Bar Association. And a number of years ago, they opened the door to what we call our 3+3 program. So that's a program for USC undergraduate students who have done extremely well and could graduate with their bachelor's degree a year early. So instead of graduating or spending that fourth year, they start law school in what would have been their fourth year of undergraduate studies. And through an exception the ABA has made, they can do so without taking a standardized test. And that's a huge carrot for an undergraduate student to be able to enroll in law school without a standardized test. I know my yield on these 3+3 students is almost 100%. So every one of them is one less that I have to enroll via the regular decision program. Similarly, we did some research into looking at launching a binding early decision program. So another program where I know that yield would be close to 100%. And to Patricia's earlier comments, when we launched it, it didn't go very well, quite honestly. We weren't getting the number of applicants we wanted, and we weren't getting the quality of applicants that we wanted. And so, I sat and I thought, why is this happening? Well, I think the simple reason is that binding early decision precludes a student from looking at other options. In particular, what the financial ramifications of their decisions would be. So I went to my dean at the time and I proposed, you know what, I want this program to be successful. Let's iterate it. Let's add some type of guaranteed scholarship assistance to anyone who is admitted through the binding early decision program. So we did that, and the program has become incredibly successful. In recent years, I've enrolled 30 to 40 students of my ultimate class of about 185 through that binding early decision program. So I add my binding early decision, my 3+3, and I'm already looking at anywhere from 40 to 50 students of my overall class, right? Which then lets me be more creative and take some more risks when enrolling the remainder of the class through the regular decision program. So those are some ways that I've innovated on the JD side, even though I haven't been looking to grow my overall enrollment. On the other side of things, at Gould, we have found ways to grow in non-JD programs. So certificates, graduate certificates, masters in law programs, offering those online, in-person, and hybrid approaches.
I appreciate both of your own insights on what is unique to your institution, what is needed, and some themes that have developed that I think would really carry over to kind of our last question, which is really, what have you learned that you would share with academic leaders that see the need or the opportunity for innovation in their space, whatever that space may be, whether it's more on the academic side or maybe more on the administrative side. You've already touched on a couple that that could be a setup again as patience. I thought that was what an interesting, it doesn't seem intuitive to think about innovation and patience, but in some ways it plays the long game as you described, Patricia. Well, so I want to come back to you all and say, what are some of the things that you would want to pass along to attendees as you've had experiences and you've learned about innovating and evolving the programs that you've been tasked to lead? And Patricia, once again, I'll start with you, but we can have this. We've got about 10 minutes, so let's take some time to be able to answer questions and think through this as maybe a back and forth. But Patricia, start with you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, patience, yes, for sure. And I'll say something else that one should do and not kind of not dismiss, which is creating connections across campus with various stakeholders and developing those. Because if you think about when you're willing to go the extra miles because you know somebody or you have a good relationship with somebody, you've worked with them in the past, and you've come to trust them. So when I think about you know, in my head about what makes it easier for me to move things forward if I want to make change, I think about um, you know, first of all, what needs analysis am I going to do to David's point? What is the data, right? You want to make sure that you're going in with a strong case. And I want to think about who's going to be impacted by whatever it is I want to do, so I can then talk to them and get folks behind what it is I'm trying to do. What are the connections that I need to make to get people on board so that we can move things forward? And getting members of the community involved can also be really helpful. Let me give you an example of something that we did that, and I think this also speaks to when you think about innovation, you really need to keep your scope quite wide. So a couple of years ago, there was a survey that was done in San Joaquin Valley where we're located, and it was discovered that diabetes was epidemic here. And so one of the things that we did was to create a diabetes education management certificate that we could offer to clinicians and non-clinicians to address a community need. And then to go out to the community, work with them around what we were developing, what we were proposing, how we were going to offer it, how could we work with communities around engaging with them to get them involved so that we could together be addressing this need. And so that's what I mean by patience, right? You're going to talk to a lot of different folks. You're going to get a lot of input from different sources, some of which is fantastic, some of which may or may not be as helpful, but you engage people and you bring them into that discussion. And so as a result, we now have, what I would say is the best diabetes education management certificate for clinicians in the country. And then we've gone out and taken that further and partnered with the University of San Francisco to offer, or University of California, San Francisco, to offer continuing medical education units for that. So you just sort of keep your eyes open for what might be a particular need in the community. Think about what you could develop that might actually work to address that need. Engage as many people as possible. Get out there, try it, learn some things, iterate, and then refine.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. And David, I'll turn to you. What are some things that you would pass along or share?
Yeah, failure's okay, right? Not every innovation is going to be successful, but let me qualify that, right? Put in guardrails so that failure doesn't become catastrophic, and data can provide those guardrails. So I'll talk about that more in a moment, but also communicate, right? Let your dean or your vice provost or your provost or whomever it is that's your key stakeholder, let them know what's going on. And update them along the way. So again, failure is okay, but put some guardrails in place. It makes it less scary. As far as the data goes, I talked about the 3+3 program. So certainly admitting students without a standardized test was a risk because the standardized test, that information provides us with some key indicators of outcomes. So we very closely tracked the outcomes of our 3+3 students who enrolled without a standardized test. And we saw that their bar passage and that their employment was just as strong as the rest of the class, right? So that then told me that was okay and that we could slightly increase those numbers. On the marketing side of things, if you have the ability to engage a CRM with very deep analytical tools, by all means do it. With the Salesforce platform that we've launched, not only do I see open rates, I see click to open rates, I see click-through rates, I see how much time an individual is engaging with embedded links within our email. I'm able to do A/B testing, right? A lot of this is like psychology, data-driven psychology, knowing how to meet our prospective student audience. And so via A/B testing, let's see what messages resonate better. Let's build in some automated drip marketing campaigns based on action or inaction that someone may take when they receive an email. Right, so there are so many ways that you can, that you can track that information. Or if you're not in an institution with the resources for, a robust CRM, it can be as simple as using Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey in building a survey, right? So that, you can track information in real time, because again, you can mitigate the effects of failure if you can change on the fly when you need to do so. So one of the things we do every year, we survey all of our admitted students, whether they enroll or not. We have an enrollment confirmation form that we ask a student to complete, either when they submit their deposit or decline their offer. If I notice that too many students are declining their offer to go to school X, and they're indicating it's because of scholarship dollars, then maybe I need to revisit my scholarship allocations that cycle. So those are some of the ways that I've used data, to inform innovation.
This is great. I think this is so relevant and practical to so many people that are in similar roles but have not had the same maybe opportunities or experiences. So it's been a joy to listen to both of you today. Any last words as we sign off and say thanks to everyone for joining us? I'd love, I think you both have left everyone with both great thoughts on your experience, but also very practical things that apply to anyone's role. Any last words before we sign off for this session?
The only other thing I would add is I think your slide captured this kind of change that we've seen students in terms of their expectations about when they engage with anything, whether it's education or when they're getting their coffee or whatever it is. And while we don't want to think that that's necessarily true of higher ed, I think your professors will tell you that students expect an email back within 5 minutes. I mean, their sort of sense of things is very different than it used to be. And so one of the other things I would say is that to support innovation and continue, what you want to do is you want to create an environment, a situation where you're incredibly responsive to students and you're listening to students, and you've created a culture that is really customer focused in that sense on students. Because as all the R&L data can tell you, like, students who don't get what they want when they need it will go elsewhere. So your opportunity is really around, if you've got them there, what can you do to kind of keep them engaged? And so the surveys that you're doing, David, just perfect. That's the exact kind of thing to let students know that what they think matters, and it's going to inform what you do going forward.
Great point. Great point. David, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say I'd echo everything Patricia said, and I would say innovation has to begin somewhere. I know it can be daunting, but I don't think not innovating is an option for all of the reasons that you have discussed, Nate, and that you have discussed, Patricia, and that we've talked about here today. Find somewhere safe where you can start innovating. And if it requires taking baby steps, then take those baby steps, right? It could be just sending out a survey to a particular segment of your target applicant pool, and then use that data and go from there.
That's great. That's great. I appreciate again the comfort at which you both kind of shared your own experiences, but also making it relevant to everyone joining. So thank you for making time today. It's just a pleasure to once again see you, as I've got a chance to meet both of you along the way. But this is a real joy to be able to introduce you to others who haven't met you along the way. And so thank you for your time this morning. And I'm going to just say, if there are questions that others have after this session, feel free. Obviously, this session is being recorded. It will be presented to you as a follow-up for attending the GOIS, our Graduate and Online Innovation Summit. But we look forward to helping you with any of your questions around enrollment, innovation, and solutions going forward. This has been a real joy to be with Patricia and David. Thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best as you go through the rest of the sessions today.